Welcome back to Psychology Bites with Dr. Cindy Eddins,
Hi.
the podcast where we talk about all things psychology and everything that you want to know about. So I'm your host, Heather Eddins. So let's jump right back into things. On today's episode, we're going to talk about ADHD. This can be a very broad topic. There's like a million different directions that we can go with it. So basically, we just Googled the most commonly asked questions, and that's kind of how we're going to format the podcast today. So if there's any questions that you have about ADHD that we don't cover in today's show, please feel free to let us know in the comments, email us, reach out to us, whatever. So before we start asking the questions, I just want to remind everyone that Dr. Eddins is still a full-time licensed and practicing psychologist in the state of Georgia. And so she is here to give us her expert input. Okay, so we're going to dive into the questions. So question number one is, what does ADHD stand for?
So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
Okay. And what causes ADHD?
So the causes are not really known. It's still a matter of research. It is genetic. We know it's got a genetic link. But other than that, they really don't know the causes because it is a neurological disorder. It's considered a neurological disorder. So it is a physical thing.
Okay. And what are the different types of ADHD?
So it depends on who you Google. But if you look at Google, you might come up with all kinds of weird types. But if you look at the DSM-5, there's 3 types. So it's attention deficit disorder, combined type, which pulls the hyperactivity and the inattentive type. And then there's, of course, the ADHD inattentive type and ADHD hyperactive type.
Okay. How would someone know if they have ADHD?
So there's a lot of signs and symptoms of ADHD that people look for. And you know, it's kind of like a lot of the other mental health disorders. People will get a catchphrase, oh, you have ADHD, you can't concentrate. And while yes, inattentive, not being able to concentrate is definitely a sign, it has to go with a lot of other things in order to actually be diagnosed. So for example, not paying attention, not being able to pay attention, getting distracted. A kid or adult could do that, say in class, in school, and they're sitting there doodling and they're not paying attention to what the teacher says. And oh, look, a squirrel. And then, of course, the teacher will say something to the parents and, you know, have them go get them diagnosed. That's not necessarily true, though. Just because the kid doesn't like math class and doesn't pay attention to math class doesn't mean he has ADHD.
Right.
It could be a matter of he doesn't like math class and he's got a girl on the brain or something. Who knows? Or it could be that, you know, this happens in multiple locations. So at home, he gets distracted, and at school, he gets distracted. He goes to church or he goes to the rec department and plays soccer and gets distracted. On multiple different things, he would get distracted still. So, and there's a lot of symptoms. But, you know, honestly, the only way you really know, you should get diagnosed from a clinical psychologist. Clinical psychologist is the person to go to for proper diagnosing because it is a neurological disorder. As a licensed clinician, I am licensed to diagnose many different diagnoses. Anything in the DSM-5 other than autism and ADHD. Those are the ones that should be clinically diagnosed by a clinical psychologist. Because, and I know I'm getting ahead, sorry, because of the symptoms that overlap so much.
Right. So what are like some of the most common symptoms of ADHD?
You asked me that already. Don't think I didn't know. So I'm a tad ADHD myself. And so some of the symptoms is getting sidetracked. It is, I always tell people that, so for example, I could be going somewhere with my son and daughter-in-law and they're out in the car waiting for me and I'm like, oh, I forgot my phone. Let me run in and get my phone. So I run in to get my phone and then I go by the laundry room and notice the litter box needs cleaned because the cat just had a doo-doo. And so I stopped to clean it because, well, it caught my attention. And then I keep going to get the phone and I noticed, oh, I forgot to make my bed. I got to make my bed. So I make my bed real quick. And then 20 minutes later, I'm still not out there and they're still waiting for me to just grab my phone.
This is true. She's late a lot of the time. like she was late today for the podcast.
Well, I had lots of things I was doing. I get distracted.
Okay. So how does someone go about getting tested for ADHD?
Getting a hold of a clinical psychologist, and they are few and far between, but there are lots of them out there that can do the testing too. It's just a matter of finding a clinical psychologist.
I think we kind of already covered about how to get diagnosed with ADHD. You do have to go to a clinical psychologist, but about the testing question, like what kind of test would someone expect to go through?
So there's the TOVA test is a real common test for ADHD. The problem is with testing and diagnosing, and this is a huge problem, and this is a huge pet peeve of mine. So the kid is distracted in class, and boys especially, because boys will be boys and they get distracted at 5, 6, 7 years old. They can't keep their little hands to themselves and whatever. It's just a thing. And so the teacher's like, oh, I can't control your child in class. He's just all over the place. You need to take him to his pediatrician and tell him that, to test him for ADHD. So mom, listening to the teacher, the authority figure, goes to the pediatrician and says, oh, my teacher says my son might have ADHD. Oh, well, if your teacher says, let me put him on Ritalin, or, and let's see if medication doesn't help. We'll just throw him on some meds. They don't do 5 hours of testing. They don't do anything. They just, he says the teacher filled out a little 5 questionnaire form. Mom filled out a little 5 questionnaire form. Oh, maybe even the school psychologist, who is not a clinical psychologist and cannot diagnose ADHD, for the record, filled out a little 5 questionnaire form, even though she never met the kid. And so now if the kid's on Ritalin or Adderall or whatever, and by the time he's 18 or 19, he's coming to me for bipolar disorder because they screwed up his neurotransmitters, because that's what those stimulants do. They make your neurotransmitters go a lot faster. They speed them up so you can hyper focus, so you can pay attention in class. And then you take them off for the weekends and holidays and summer vacation because you don't want all that meds in his system. Then his neurotransmitters slow back down again. Then they speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. And by the time he's 18, 19, that's exactly what his neurotransmitters are doing, because that's what they were taught to do. You can take him off his medicine, but his neurotransmitters are taught to go slow, fast, and they will continue to do so. And now the kid has bipolar disorder.
Yeah. That kind of ties back into our first episode where we talked about the difference between going to a medical doctor versus a psychologist for certain things. It's really important to understand what you actually need. So what is the difference between ADD and ADHD?
There's no such thing as ADD. ADD, I know you all are thinking, but my doctor called it ADD. Yes, okay, back in the 80s we had ADD, but they took ADD out of the DSM-5. It is no longer considered, it's kind of like we took Asperger's off the table. We don't diagnose Asperger's and we don't diagnose ADD. It is simply autism and a spectrum, and it is simply ADHD, combined type, inattentive, or hyperactivity type. There is no more ADD.
Right.
I don't care how many medical doctors still use that term. Drives me nuts. Even psychiatrists use the term still. Like, for real.
Yeah. Okay, how does a person with ADHD think?
So, people that don't have ADHD get annoyed with people that have ADHD. But, I'm going to say this. I would rather be ADHD than not be ADHD. And let's just use the term neurodivergent versus neurotypical. I would much prefer to be neurodivergent. So one of the biggest difference between thinking neurodivergent and from somebody who's neurotypical obviously focuses more and can pay attention better, because they see the flowers and they're just looking at the flowers and like, oh, they're so pretty, and there's this flower and that flower. But somebody with ADHD that's neurodivergent sees the flowers and everything else and everything, and we're trying to take everything in at the same time. ADHD, just like autism, is a neurodivergent disorder. And so it does affect your senses a lot. The senses are always affected. And so you see more. You see the bigger picture, but you can also focus in and just see the flowers. And that's a helpful thing. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. How does ADHD normally get treated?
With medication by the pediatrician,
Well,
and it shouldn't be.
but also for adults, like.
So most people go the route of medication. I've never used medication, and I won't. I can hyper focus. I know how to hyper focus. And these people on these TikToks, first of all, that sit there and tell people, look at my messy house, look at my kitchen, and the sink is piled with dishes and everything's a mess. And I'm like, I would go nuts in a house like that. My house has to be clean. I mean, I can't stand it when my house is messy. I just get like, ugh. Everything has a place and everything has to be in its place. It's important when you're ADHD. It's really important because you see all this stuff. So untreated ADHD may look like a sink full of dishes in a really messy house, but that's because it's untreated. They have to learn their coping skills or take meds or do something. But it's way better just to like learn coping skills, I feel like.
Yeah.
Don't use those meds. They mess up your neurotransmitters.
Yeah. So just like, I guess a better way to sum it up is like, you don't just have to get medication. You can also get ADHD treated just by seeking out a counselor and learning coping skills. Like you don't have to always go to the medicine. Like,
Right.
you got to find out what works for you.
Medicine is good and a lot of people need it, and that's fine. But use the medicine while you're learning your coping skills. I'm not down in the medicine. I'm just saying that it should be properly diagnosed before the medicine gets enacted, but you can always use coping skills.
Right. Okay. How many people have ADHD?
So I looked that question up this morning because I wanted to make sure. So in the class, I teach college too. And in my classes, I have often told students, and because this used to be the thing. It was, we were at like 23% for a rate of diagnosing ADHD in our youth, and every other country was less than 2%. So I looked it up to see, and thank God we've gotten better. So this country is now at 9.8% diagnosing rate, whereas other countries are 2.3%. Still, we're way over diagnosing. And the reason that is because we let our pediatricians and our teachers get away with diagnosing, who have had maybe my introductory to psychology class, and that's it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but most of y'all have not had more than one introductory to psych class and are trying to diagnose ADHD and then throw kids on the medicine. And that's why USA is a lot higher. Other countries do not allow that. You have to be a clinical psychologist to diagnose ADHD in other countries. Even third world countries, like, we're way behind.
Yeah.
It's sad.
So how common is ADHD actually? Like, do you have any statistics that's like 1 in so many people have it?
It depends. I think, I don't remember what it said. I looked it up this morning. It was like 1 in 9,000 or something like that. It shouldn't be as prominent as it is. If you go into any elementary classroom, you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 kids out of 20 diagnosed with ADHD, and that's way too high. They're not all ADHD.
Yeah.
They're just not.
Okay. This next question says, how do you deal with ADHD? I feel like we've kind of covered that, but again, these are just most Googled questions.
So one thing I always try to tell people is if you got a kid that's ADHD, really distracted and can't pay attention, get them something. Get them something to hold on to. A little chicken. But I'll give Egg Georgia Farm credit some here. Free advertisement. But you they have these when you walk in their building, and you can just play with them, just like squeeze things. Those spinners everybody hates. I wear a spinner ring so I can play with it. My crystal, it has lots of little crystals. Sit there and play with it. It keeps you distracted. You can focus if you're doing something with your hands, and so too kids can too. If you give them something to do with their hands, they can pay attention to that math class.
Yeah. Okay, how would you or how should you discipline a child that has ADHD?
You shouldn't discipline him for having his symptoms. So that's actually a really good question. This comes up a lot. So what happens is I always tell people that when I'm diagnosing them, and I'm first seeing somebody and I'm trying to figure out what their diagnosis might be, and they tell me, oh, I've been diagnosed ADHD, or I've had all this trauma in my life. And PTSD and ADHD symptoms overlap a lot. So do bipolar. But the ADHD and the PTSD. Okay, wait, what was the question?
How should you discipline a child?
Oh yeah, discipline. So I always tell people that the PTSD symptoms, every kid, every human that has ADHD probably has PTSD because of the discipline. Because of what's wrong with you. Why are you so distracted? Why can't you focus? Pay attention. Why are you so clumsy? What's wrong with you? Pay attention to where you're walking. It's always what's wrong with you. Do this. Don't do that. Don't do what you're doing. Don't be who you are. You're wrong to be who you are. And constantly, and the parents don't mean it. They're just trying to get their kids to be normal, but their kid isn't normal. They're divergent, neurodivergent. And yes, they lose focus. Help them to focus. Don't yell at them for doing it. That's why everybody that has ADHD seems to have PTSD too, because you've grown up hearing how clumsy you are, how wrong you are for everything, and it's uncool. It's really just not good.
So just to cover this more specifically, because I assume that we'll probably have questions about it. So let's say that the kid is running around doing a bunch of different stuff and they get hurt. How is a parent supposed to handle that? They can't discipline them. So what would you recommend that the parent, how should they handle the situation?
They should handle it before they get hurt and redirect. So literally my family doctor asked my mom, or told my mom, I guess, if he didn't know her better, he would put her on child abuse charges. I've had 36 stitches in my leg. I've had 6 stitches here. I don't even know how many stitches I have on my arm. And my mom always told me as I was growing up, I'm an accident looking for a place to happen, and I often found one. Redirect me. Don't let me just oh, look, a squirrel. Let me wander off into the woods and get bit by a snake. Or, don't let me. Redirect your child. Give them something to, here, play with this little chicken. Play with that. Don't, go play with the...
So, keep their mind busy on other things.
Yeah. Keeps their hands busy, too.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, how does ADHD affect the brain? Where in the brain does ADHD occur?
So, it's mainly in the frontal cortex. And this is a lot where we do our planning, organizing, and it has a lot to do with emotions too. And so they think, again, this is, being researched, but they think it has a lot to do with the planning, organizing, and the emotional aspects of it.
Okay. How can you get focused with ADHD?
it's easy to hyper focus once you learn how. So her husband, my child, thinks, I know to this day, he will tell you that I can't cook bacon without burning it. So it's true, right? But I always cook bacon in the oven because that's where you're supposed to cook it. And I've always cooked it in the oven, and I don't like cooking it in the microwave or whatever on top of the stove. It's too greasy that way. So I've always put it in the oven, and it takes 20 to 30 minutes to cook it, depending on how much you're cooking. And so I would have my laptop at the kitchen table and be grading papers, and I would smell the bacon, and I would know it's about done. And I'm like, okay, I can get one more paper done. And then I would continue smelling the bacon as it was burning, and I'd still be, I can do one more paper, I can do one more paper, I can grade one more thing. And I couldn't pull myself out of the hyper focus. I could put myself in pretty easily. All I have to do is sit in front of my laptop and I can go into hyper focus automatically. But pulling myself out is another challenge. But I have learned to do that over the years. It's gotten better. I can do it better. But you really got to talk to yourself. I mean, I have found that talking to myself is really helpful, and I don't mean like the voices are coming from somewhere else. I know where the voice is coming from. It's me, but it's me talking myself through it. Okay, the bacon's done, Cindy. No more papers. No, you can't do another one. Come on, get up, let go get the bacon, kind of deal.
Okay. Okay. How do you talk to someone with ADHD? Because like we talked about earlier, you know, some people get irritated having conversations with someone that has ADHD.
Because they get redirected easily. You know, I mean, we could be having a conversation and you ask me a question, for example, and I start talking about it, and then I'm like, oh wait, what was the question again? And does that irritate people? Absolutely. Can I help that? No. It's helpful to know if you're neurodivergent and you're talking with somebody who's neurotypical. And then the two people can reel in their sides. It is not wrong to be neurodivergent, first of all. And it is not wrong to be neurotypical. It's just different. It's like having a different skin color, or different ethnicity, or a different hair color or eye color. It's just different. It's not good or bad. And people that are neurotypical, I honestly feel need to have some more patience with people that are neurodivergent, because both sides have things to offer and both sides are good at different things.
Yeah.
And together you can be really good.
I would say, for my personal experience, I would say that yes, it's a lot about having patience. And also, like she said with the redirection thing, you just have to bring them back to the topic. Yeah. Like, you just go into the conversation expecting that they're gonna get sidetracked, and just like remind like you have to remember the topic yourself, because sometimes like she'll go off for like 10 minutes and I'll be like, wait, what was I even asking her? I don't even remember anymore. So it's also a little bit of remembering what you asked them and just trying to redirect them. So like, I think we kind of did this earlier where you went off and you were like, wait, what was the question? And so I just like repeat it, and I try to like ask more specific questions to kind of get you in the direction that I want you to talk about. So it is about patience, but it's also about just knowing how to communicate properly.
Yeah, communication is a big key in anything.
Yeah.
Everybody that comes to counseling, without a doubt, and never say never, never say always, unless you're saying the statement, but pretty much everybody that comes to counseling has communication issues they have to work on. Maybe other issues too, but communication is always a big part of it.
I feel like everybody on this planet has communication issues.
I agree.
in some format. I mean, even if you like communicate for a living, like even if you're a public speaker, sometimes it's hard to go from being a public speaker to just talking to someone one-on-one.
Yeah,
and
it's different.
You just have to you have to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. And I think we kind of covered this too, but one of the other questions was, how do you help a child with ADHD in school? And I guess that would probably go back to like the fidget toys and just making sure that they've got something.
Yeah, give them something to hold on to.
Yeah. Yep.
Even when I'm counseling, I counsel everything from home nowadays. I'm on telehealth. But even while I'm counseling, I have like little stuffed animal that's really soft, and I'll play with him, or I'll play with all kinds of stupid little things sitting at my desk while I'm talking to the person, because it helps me to focus. It just, I stay right there with them if I got something in my hand.
Yeah. And the next question is kind of the same thing. It says, like, how do you help a child without medication? And I think the answer would be the same for that. So I'm going to kind of skip over that one. Okay. How does ADHD medication work? I know we kind of touched on this earlier.
Yeah, it's a stimulant. So it stimulates the neurotransmitters to work faster, which helps the person to focus. This is why college students sell them and buy them illegally, because they can focus when they go to take their midterms or their finals. So they all, not all of them, of course, but, a lot of them will. A lot of them will illegally use stimulants because it helps them to focus. It helps anybody. It doesn't matter. But I know my kid isn't probably really ADHD, but the stimulants make him focus. Well, okay. It'll make anybody focus.
It's their job.
It's their job. That's what the drugs do.
Yeah. Okay. I think we also kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but how often does ADHD co-occur with bipolar disorder?
The problem is that it creates bipolar disorder, like I said earlier. It's not that it co-occurs, it creates it. So in order to have bipolar schizophrenia, major depression disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, any of those big ones, what's considered an SPMI, severe and persistent mental illness, is there has to be a catalyst. There has to be a problem, a situation that the person goes through that is traumatic to them. And once you have a trauma, your schizophrenia is allowed to rear its ugly head. Bipolar is allowed to rear its ugly head. Bipolar will not rear its ugly head without a trauma or medication.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other conditions that can occur with ADHD, or I guess are
PTSD's really, I think it's it happens with it all the time because of the way they're treated when they're growing up.
Yeah.
People and your own parent, my mother. I mean, like, what's wrong with you, Cindy? Why can't you focus? Blah blah blah, and it's just to the point where you honestly start believing that, yeah, I'm a clumsy person. I know I'm clumsy. Why am I clumsy? Because I'm neurodivergent. So yeah, I trip over my own feet because I'm looking at something else. So look at the horse, and I'm looking at my horse and I'm walking this way. Next thing I stumble. I've done all kinds of hurts to my body from doing stuff like that. But, like helping kids instead of telling them how wrong they are, because that just creates that PTSD and peace, and then it's even worse. Then it's harder to kind of come back from that.
Yeah. Okay, this one I didn't really understand, but again, I'm just reading what Google asks. So this one says, is there a connection between obesity and ADHD?
Okay, so, all right, I looked this up too. I had to look this up because it's my experience that when a kid is put on stimulants, what happens if they're not really ADHD and they're not neurodivergent, they will never eat. They'll stop eating. They will get super skinny. So whenever I see a kid that is super, super skinny and their parents tell me they've been on ADHD medicine for a year or two, I'm like, this kid is not ADHD. I'm not going to diagnose it, but I am going to send them to a clinical psychologist to get accurately diagnosed, and the kid's not going to be ADHD because they shouldn't be skinny. The steroids should make them want to eat. It should not make them not want to eat. And if they aren't eating, they can't eat, and all they can do is zoom in, they're on way too much medication. They shouldn't be on that medication. They're probably neurotypical.
Okay.
And you're ruining your kid. And the skinny kid is going to turn bipolar probably. The chances of the overweight kid that's on ADHD, just learn to help him, with his weight management or her weight management. It's it's a product of the medication. Often, like a lot of the medications, all kinds of medications make people gain weight. You see antipsychotics, they really make people gain weight.
Yeah.
Hey, we should do a antipsychotic episode with relation to cancer.
Yeah, we can put that down.
I have pet peeves.
Okay. What is the difference between adult ADHD and child ADHD?
I think adults handle it better, and adults don't get yelled at as much, so it's easier. Nobody's going to yell at me for being clumsy. Nobody's going to yell at me. Well, they might yell at me for getting distracted, but not to the point, like, it's not like when you're a little kid and your mom's constantly yelling at you because she's trying to control you, and we can't control anything anybody else says, does, or thinks. Not even our kids. You can put rules on your kids. If they break them, there's a consequence, right? Because they have the right to break them. You can't control their little body all the time. And, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think we also kind of covered this one, but can a person have ADHD without being hyperactive?
Yeah, it's an attentive type. So I wouldn't want that personally. I like my hyperactivity.
It keeps her busy.
Yeah. And but inattentive type is just the inability to focus and pay attention and concentrate without the hyperactivity.
Okay. Can ADHD be cured?
Cured is a curious word, actually. With any, it's a neurological disorder, so it can be treated, but there's no cure because it's not wrong.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that, for the record. Neurodivergency isn't like it shouldn't be a disorder. It shouldn't be, it's just some people are neurodivergent, some people are neurotypical. Some people have blonde hair, some people have brown hair. It just is what it is. And so it can't be cured because you can't make somebody neurotypical. And honestly, helping them to understand who they are and how they think, it's like left-handed versus right-handed. When my sister's left-handed, and when we were growing up, everybody would slap her hand and not let her use her left hand for anything. She had to learn to write with her right hand. That's just mean. Now we understand that some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed, and they can write left-handed all they want to. And it's the same with neurodivergency versus neurotypical.
Yeah. Like
It really should. It's just the thing.
Just the way your brain works. Okay. Can people outgrow ADHD? And I think this is kind of like what you said earlier. I don't think it's a matter of outgrowing it. I think they just learn how to deal with it.
Yes.
We
learn how to control it.
Yep. Is there a biological basis for ADHD? Like, is it genetic?
Yes. We said that earlier. I remember.
Okay.
Yes, it's genetically linked.
Okay. Okay. Does ADHD have different degrees of severity?
Yes, I don't feel like that's really studied very well, but yeah, I feel like some people are a lot more in tune, sensitive, distractible than other people are. It's just like autism, there's a scale.
Yeah.
With neurodivergency and autism, it's both on a scale. It's a neurodivergent scale. We're there with autistic people because it affects our senses. It affects other things, and the way the neurology is, we're lumped together.
Yeah. Okay, how would a counselor or a therapist generally deal with ADHD? Like, what kind of things are they going to teach you?
So I teach them their skills. Personally, I like to utilize DBT skills, which DBT is dialectic behavior therapy. And dialectic is a really cool word because it means duality. It means two different things, two opposing things can exist at the same time. I can be very coordinated and I can be very clumsy, and both things can exist at the same time, and that's okay. And learning skills that go along with DBT helps us to challenge ourselves to focus, to walk a straight line and not trip over our own feet, whatever. It allows us to be able to do that.
This is going to be a little sidetracked, but when you said that, it just made me think of like if you got pulled over for drunk driving and they wanted to do the test where they make you walk in a straight line.
I thought of that when I was saying it too.
So like, would it be difficult for someone with ADHD to perform that test? And could they be like misconstrued as to think that the person is drunk driving when they're not drunk?
Have you ever seen me walk a straight line? Like,
okay.
I want to say that, yeah, that would be pretty hard, but they can also do a breathalyzer.
Right.
They can smell.
Or they can do like a blood test or whatever.
You can smell when somebody's drunk. I mean, like, I can't help it. If I can't walk a straight line, just smell my breath or, give me a breathalyzer or something. I'm not drinking and driving just because I can't walk straight.
Yeah.
I'd succumb to the breathalyzer personally. I'd be like, I'm ADHD is all get out, so breathalyze me. I can't walk that straight line.
Okay. So I think that pretty much covers the main questions that I found. But is there anything else that we didn't cover that you would want to talk about in regards to ADHD?
Just that, you can compare a lot of symptoms, and sure, symptoms might be different for different people, but the few things that I usually ask, if somebody says that they think they're ADHD and they haven't been diagnosed, I want to send them to a clinical psychologist, but I don't send them until I screen them. Mm-hmm. I do my own little few minute screening with my own little 5-question questionnaire. But then if I say, well, yeah, you might be ADHD, you need to go for a diagnosis. You need to go to so-and-so to get a diagnosis. And then I'll send them to somebody. But only if they answer yes to all my little questions. And one of my little questions is, how does caffeine affect you? So if caffeine, you can drink a cup of coffee and go to sleep, you might be ADHD. If you're always being told how clumsy you are, you might be ADHD. If you are constantly distracted by things and have a hard time focusing, you might be ADHD. If you can play video games or whatever it is that you just like totally, me as my laptop, totally focus into and can't hear your mom when she's calling you or whoever when they're calling you, you might be ADHD. That's hyperfocus. What else? Smell, sense of smell. For some reason, everybody's got different with their senses, but the senses are usually heightened. Mm-hmm. And like, I have a strong sense of smell. Just for example, if you remember, there was a fire in one of my electrical outlets right outside my window to my office at my house. And I didn't know about it, but I smelled it. And I smelled electrical burning thing. And I brought these two people into my house and was like, you guys smell it, right? No, you're crazy, Mom. There's nothing here. Yeah, okay, I smell it. I'm telling you, I smell something. Well, it was months later that the air condition guy had to come out because my air conditioner unit wasn't working. And he's like, here's the problem. You had a fire in this box. This was a while ago too. You're lucky your whole house didn't burn down. And I'm like, see, I knew I smelled it. You got to learn to trust yourself. My senses, it's funny, but my hearing and my eyes are going because I'm old. But my sense of smell is really picking up. I've always been able to, like, on Psych, the show Psych, I got the super smeller. Sean and Gus both were ADHD on that, for the record. They had Gus having, like, symptoms of ADHD because he had the super smeller. He could smell anything. You got to be a little neurodivergent to be able to do that, I feel like. Just saying.
Okay. Well, I think that pretty much concludes our episode for today. Again, if you have any other questions about ADHD that we didn't talk about, feel free to comment, send us an email and let us know. As a reminder, if you like the things that you hear from Dr. Edens about psychology, if you're interested in hearing more from her one-on-one, she is still accepting clients online at Garden of Eden Counseling. It is only for Georgia, so you have to live in Georgia to see her. And I will put the website in the comments, and it has our email and phone number and all that stuff on it. So don't forget to join us next Sunday for our next episode. We're going to talk about different types of learning styles, and hopefully we are going to incorporate the dogs for that episode. So yes, you can look forward to that. But anyway, thanks for joining us for our second episode of Psychology Bites. Have a great week.
Thanks.